Sometimes we expect something to happen, it doesn't happen, and we get frustrated. Let's talk about that.
This is a beautiful thought.
Welcome, strangers and new friends. Welcome, beautiful thinkers. I'd like to talk to you about why we get frustrated. I was thinking about this today. This is funny. Sometimes I told my friend Luis the other day that sometimes I get frustrated with people and it's a problem for me. And he was like, well, you've always been so patient with me and extremely kind. He said, I just can't imagine you getting frustrated. And he said he imagined this little cartoon character, like this little British guy with glasses. And he's like, I'm a little upset. And I was like, well, actually, I do have quite a problem with frustration. It doesn't necessarily come out when I'm talking to Luis. But sometimes, everybody gets frustrated. And I'd like to talk about the causes of that and the solutions. So, actually, what Louise said was interesting. She said, I'm a little frustrated. I'm a little bit upset. And what happens when you verbalize your frustration or other emotions, it actually changes the part of your brain. So it's no longer in they used to call it the reptilian brain. It's no longer in the emotive brain. It moves into a different section of the brain. It's like going into the neocortex. It's like going into a part of the brain, the blue hat part of the brain, the part of the brain where you can actually look at processes, analyze them, continue or reject them, the more organizing part of the brain. So if you are feeling something that you don't want to be feeling, an interesting first step is to verbalize it. You could say, I feel frustrated or upset or sad or depressed or whatever it is. And that's going to start to help you get a little bit more objective view of it. Now, today, what happened was my friend asked me for advice. And at some point in the interaction, I said, well, look, I can see you have this pattern of behavior or this pattern of thought. And she responded to me, and my interpretation of what we said was that for some reason I thought she wasn't taking me seriously. And I was like, listen to me. You asked for my advice. Do you want my advice or not? My time is valuable and this kind of thing. And it's kind of silly because my standards were so high for what counted as respect or what counted as valuing my opinion or my time. It's like if she said one or two things wrong in a second language, by the way, then suddenly I'm going to start treating her harshly. And that's just not necessary. It doesn't really help me, and it didn't help her. So I was able to talk it out and try to express my frustrations in a more productive manner. You can look at, there's a book about it. It's called Nonviolent Communication, which is very interesting to help us improve the way that we communicate our emotions, our frustrations, and our delight to others, to let them know how they can make lives easier for us, because it's not always an easy thing to communicate. Now, why does this happen? So like I said, I had these very high standards of what counted as respect or valuing my time. And those standards are almost never going to be met. Like nobody's going to say things to me perfectly all the time in exactly the way that I want it. And like they're always going to contradict me in some form that's very likely to happen. So why get so upset about it? Right? Why get it? Well, because I had this expectation. And a lot of the time, our expectations aren't conscious. But in a moment like this, we can start to bring those expectations into the conscious mind so we can start to look at them and whether they hold up. Now, is it on the surface? I might say, well, it's very reasonable for me, for example, to expect that somebody understands me the first time I explain a concept. Now, if we have that just lurking in our subconscious as an assumption, we might not realize how irrational or how unlikely that actually is. Because chances are when you explain a new concept to somebody the first time, they're not going to get it. They're not going to grok it completely. They're not going to wrap their heads around it. Maybe a little bit of it sinks in. But for most people, it's going to take 2 or 3 times explaining something, maybe in different ways with analogy or different forms of communication, visual and verbal and audio and other things, to help that get into their brain. So if it turns out you have this expectation like this, I explained this person should understand me. Well, that's it's going to cause you problems, because if you keep having that expectation, then you're going to get frustrated every time that comes up. So we know that actually what is likely to happen is that people are going to misunderstand occasionally. We do need to ask follow-up questions and be careful about the way we do them, so we can communicate respectfully, so we can confirm that somebody really understands what we're saying. And then we can move on, and we need to get frustrated. We don't have to get frustrated if we let go of our expectations. Now, what happens a lot of the time, expectations are subconscious, and something comes up that we didn't expect, and then we're like, okay, what do I do now? Well, in that moment, you can let go of the expectation if you can exercise presence in that moment. All right, it's not always easy to do, but that's why we do this stuff like meditation and mindfulness meditation and bodily awareness and all these kinds of things. Because when we become aware of a frustration, we don't have to react to it. Like I said, not easy to do, but that's the way things go down. So I'd like to mention again about that process of analyzing or disputing our expectations. Of course, in cognitive behavioral therapy, we have this formula, which is A, B, C, D. So A is the activating event. So say, for example, the thing that happens that defies your expectations. B is the belief. So I had this belief that people have to express themselves in a certain form for me to feel valued. And if they don't do that, then I'm being disrespected. Now, that's a very high standard for other people to live up to. The consequence, the C, was me getting frustrated. And the dispute, of course, is for me to say, actually, this is a very high standard of behavior that I'm expecting from people, and I don't need to try to expect that or anticipate that. I can just expect that, okay, occasionally people are going to make missteps in their communication. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have bad intent or ill will, or they're trying to disrespect me, or they're not valuing me, because sometimes people express things in different forms and their intentions may well be good. So there's no reason for me to assume that their intentions are actually bad, or they're not valuing my time or something like that. All right, it's not easy to put that into practice, but at least now it's become conscious and I can start to change that. So those are the things. Verbalize your emotions and gain more control of them. Look at the underlying assumptions. You can use that ABCD method, so look up more about that. If you're curious, you can Google. I'm sure you'll find a lot of interesting stuff about it. And when something does happen that defies our expectations, we can let it go and practice mindfulness so we can be in the state of mind to do that. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for doing your best to reduce frustration and improve communication and live a happier life. Life is a lot happier when you're less frustrated. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for listening. Have a wonderful, blessed day, and I'll talk to you soon.
A beautiful thought.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, you got something out of it, please just take 5 or 10 seconds to think about a friend of yours who could also benefit from this or any episode of the podcast. Send them a little message and say to them a reason why they should listen. Give them a little extra push there. Thanks for coming along, and I'll talk to you soon.